Before we begin, every video on this channel is created with one simple purpose: not to fill your mind with information, but to leave you with at least one idea that has the power to change the way you think, act, or live. Because sometimes a single realization is all it takes to create a completely different future. So, as you watch, don't try to remember everything. Just look for that one idea that speaks to you. Today's video is about a simple philosophy that quietly transformed industries, reshaped millions of lives, and continues to influence some of the world's most successful people. Its power doesn't come from doing more. It comes from doing something most people overlook. Let's discover what it is. Every year, millions of people promise themselves the same things. This year, I'll get fit. I'll wake up early. I'll finally start that business. I'll stop procrastinating. For a few days, everything feels different. Motivation is high. The plan is clear. The future looks exciting. But then, something changes. The alarm gets snoozed. The workouts stop. The books remain unopened. The goals slowly disappear until they're postponed to next Monday or even next year. But here's the question. Why do New Year's resolutions fail? Why do highly motivated people quit? Why do intelligent people procrastinate even when they know exactly what they should be doing? Most people believe the answer is laziness or a lack of discipline. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the real problem isn't your motivation? It isn't your intelligence. It isn't even your discipline. What if the real problem is the way we approach change itself? Decades ago, a simple Japanese philosophy challenged everything we believed about self-improvement. Instead of asking people to make massive changes overnight, it taught them to become better through the smallest possible steps. That philosophy is called Kaizen, and it may completely change the way you think about success. Imagine a country reduced to rubble. In 1945, after World War II, Japan faced one of the greatest challenges in modern history. Cities were destroyed, industries had collapsed, resources were scarce, and the country's reputation for manufacturing was weak. Japan couldn't compete by producing more. It had to compete by becoming better. During this period, a simple philosophy began to take shape: Kaizen. The word Kaizen comes from two Japanese words: Kai, meaning change, and Zen, meaning good or better. Together, Kaizen simply means change for the better through continuous improvement. Instead of waiting for one revolutionary breakthrough, Kaizen encouraged thousands of small improvements made consistently, every single day. One of the companies that embraced this philosophy was Toyota. Rather than searching for one perfect solution, Toyota encouraged everyone, from factory workers to senior managers, to look for small ways to improve quality, reduce waste, and solve problems. One improvement may have saved only a few seconds. Another may have reduced a small mistake. By themselves, these changes seemed insignificant. But together, they transformed Toyota into one of the most respected automobile manufacturers in the world. Soon, people around the globe began asking an important question.
If this philosophy can transform a company, can it transform a person? The answer was yes. Today, Kaizen is no longer limited to factories or businesses. It's used by entrepreneurs building companies, students preparing for exams, athletes chasing excellence, artists mastering their craft, and ordinary people trying to build extraordinary lives. Because at its core, Kaizen isn't about becoming perfect overnight. It's about becoming just a little better than yesterday. And as you'll soon discover, that tiny difference can completely change your future. If Kaizen is so simple, why don't most people naturally live this way? The answer isn't that we're lazy. It's that our minds are wired to resist change. Think about it. The moment you decide to completely transform your life, your brain immediately begins looking for reasons to stay the same. Not because it wants you to fail, but because familiar feels safe. This is called your comfort zone. Even if your current habits aren't making you happy, they're predictable. And our minds often choose familiar discomfort over unfamiliar growth. But that's only the beginning. There's something even deeper: identity conflict. Imagine someone who has always believed, "I'm not a disciplined person." Then one day they decide, "From tomorrow, I'll wake up at 5 a.m., exercise every day, read for 2 hours, and never procrastinate again." Their actions are trying to become someone new, but their identity is still holding on to the old story. When your actions and identity disagree, your identity usually wins. Then comes decision fatigue. Many people think success comes from making hundreds of good decisions every day. But every decision consumes mental energy. What should I eat? Should I work now or later? Should I exercise today? By evening, even simple choices begin to feel exhausting. That's why relying on willpower alone rarely works. And then there's perfectionism, one of the most convincing forms of procrastination. We tell ourselves, "I'll start when I have more time, when I have better equipment, when I know enough, when everything is perfect." But perfection never arrives. So neither does progress. Our minds also crave instant gratification. We naturally prefer rewards we can enjoy today over rewards that may take months or years. Scrolling for 10 minutes feels easier than learning a new skill. One gives immediate pleasure. The other demands patience. Finally, there's the quiet fear that many people never admit: the fear of failure. Sometimes we don't avoid change because it's difficult. We avoid it because we're afraid of discovering what happens if we give everything we have and still don't succeed. So we protect ourselves by never fully trying. When you combine comfort, identity, decision fatigue, perfectionism, instant gratification, and fear, it's easy to understand why dramatic life changes usually collapse after a few days. The problem isn't that you're incapable of change. The problem is that you're trying to fight human nature instead of working with it. And that's exactly where Kaizen becomes different. Now that we understand why dramatic change usually fails, let's look at the principle that makes Kaizen so powerful. Most people think Kaizen is simply about taking small actions, but that's only the surface. The real power lies in reducing resistance. Imagine you're standing in front of a heavy door. Pushing it with all your strength feels difficult. But if someone unlocks it first, the same door opens with almost no effort. Our minds work in a similar way. The bigger the task appears, the more resistance we feel. But when the first step is so small that it almost feels impossible to refuse, resistance begins to disappear. And something interesting happens. When you repeat that small action today and tomorrow and the day after, you're no longer just completing a task. You're sending a message to yourself. I'm someone who shows up. That's how consistency builds identity. You don't become a disciplined person because you feel disciplined. You become disciplined because you repeatedly act like one. Once your identity begins to change, your habits follow naturally. You stop forcing yourself to act. It simply becomes part of who you are. And habits, repeated over weeks, months, and years, shape your results. This is why two people can have the same goal, but completely different outcomes. It doesn't ask you to become extraordinary today. It simply asks you to become slightly better than yesterday. And over time, that small difference becomes impossible to ignore. So far, we've explored why Kaizen works. Now let's explore how to live it. Kaizen isn't just an inspiring idea. It's built on a set of principles that quietly reshape the way you think, work, and grow. Let's walk through the 5 principles that make Kaizen so effective. Principle 1. Small improvements. Most people believe success comes from one big breakthrough. Kaizen says the opposite. Real transformation is built from tiny improvements that are almost invisible on their own. Imagine a photographer who wants to capture extraordinary images. Instead of buying the most expensive camera immediately, they spend 1 week learning composition. The next week, they study lighting, then color, then storytelling. Each lesson seems insignificant, but months later, they're creating photographs that look completely different. Not because of one dramatic leap, but because hundreds of tiny improvements quietly accumulated. This is the first lesson of Kaizen. Don't ask, how can I change my life today? Ask, what's one thing I can improve today that my future self will thank me for? Small improvements seem slow until you look back. Principle 2. Continuous reflection. Improvement isn't just about doing more. It's about learning from what you've already done. Many people repeat the same mistakes for years, not because they're incapable, but because they never pause to reflect. Think of an archer aiming at a target. After every shot, they don't simply fire another arrow. They stop, observe, adjust their posture, correct their aim. Only then do they shoot again. Life works the same way. Reflection turns experience into wisdom. Without reflection, experience is just repetition. Ask yourself questions like, what worked today? What drained my energy? What could I do slightly differently tomorrow? Notice something. None of these questions demand perfection. They simply invite progress. That's the Kaizen mindset. Principle 3. Remove waste. When people hear the word waste, they often think of physical clutter. But Kaizen teaches us that waste exists everywhere. Wasted time, wasted energy, wasted attention, wasted decisions. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with rocks. Each rock is small. One represents unnecessary distractions. Another represents endless notifications. Another represents constantly switching between tasks. One rock doesn't seem heavy, but after walking for miles, every extra weight slows you down. Our lives are often like that backpack. Success isn't always about adding more. Sometimes it's about removing what never belonged there. Less distraction, less unnecessary worry, less mental clutter. When you remove what's draining you, you create space for what truly matters. Principle 4. Standardize good habits. Here's something interesting. Successful people don't rely on making great decisions every day. They reduce the number of decisions they have to make. They create systems. Imagine a pilot. Before every flight, they don't rely on memory. They follow a checklist. Not because they're inexperienced, but because consistency prevents mistakes. The same principle applies to life. If something works, don't leave it to chance. Turn it into a routine. Maybe every evening you spend 10 minutes planning tomorrow. Maybe every morning begins without checking your phone. Maybe every Friday you review your week. The habit itself isn't the goal. The consistency is. Systems protect progress when motivation disappears. And motivation always disappears eventually. It simply keeps moving forward. That's the Kaizen mindset. Celebrate your progress. Be proud of how far you've come. But never believe you've reached your final version. There is always another lesson to learn, another skill to develop, another perspective to understand, another small improvement waiting to be made. Because the people who achieve extraordinary things aren't the ones who transform themselves overnight. They're the ones who quietly become a little better, day after day, year after year. And that's the true beauty of Kaizen. It doesn't ask you to be extraordinary today. It simply asks you to refuse to stop growing. By now, you might be thinking, this philosophy sounds powerful, but does it actually work in everyday life? The answer is yes, because Kaizen isn't limited to factories, businesses, or history books. It's a way of approaching every part of your life. Let's see what that looks like. Learning. Most people believe learning means absorbing huge amounts of information in a short time. They watch hours of videos, buy expensive courses, and create ambitious study schedules. Then, within a week, they feel overwhelmed. Kaizen takes a different approach. Instead of asking, "How much can I learn today?" ask, "What concept can I truly understand today?" Knowledge grows layer by layer. A strong foundation is built brick by brick, not all at once. Learning isn't a race. It's an accumulation of understanding. Relationships? Many relationships don't end because of one major argument. They slowly weaken through small moments of neglect. A conversation that never happened. A thank you that was never spoken. A message left unsent. Kaizen reminds us that meaningful relationships are strengthened by small, consistent acts of care. A few minutes of genuine listening. A simple expression of gratitude. A thoughtful question. Tiny moments may seem insignificant, but over months and years, they build trust that cannot be created overnight. Productivity. People often confuse being busy with being productive. A calendar full of tasks, constant notifications, switching from one activity to another can create the illusion of progress. But movement isn't always progress. Kaizen encourages you to improve your process instead of simply increasing your workload. Ask yourself, what's one thing that keeps interrupting my focus? Maybe it's unnecessary meetings. Maybe it's checking your phone every few minutes. Maybe it's trying to do everything at once. Removing one obstacle can often accomplish more than adding another hour of work. Creativity. Many people wait for inspiration. They believe creativity appears like lightning. But creative people know something different. Creativity grows through regular practice. A designer explores one new idea. A musician experiments with one new sound. A filmmaker studies one storytelling technique. Each attempt may seem ordinary, but over time, these small experiments develop originality. Great ideas rarely appear fully formed. They evolve through countless small improvements. Financial discipline. People often think financial success begins with earning more. Sometimes it does. But lasting financial stability usually begins with managing what you already have. Kaizen encourages awareness before expansion. One unnecessary expense noticed today, one smarter financial decision tomorrow, one consistent habit repeated every month. These small choices gradually create stability. Wealth is often less about dramatic wins and more about consistent decisions made over time. Perhaps the most overlooked application of Kaizen is the way we treat our own minds. Many people expect happiness to arrive after achieving a goal, but emotional well-being is also built gradually. Choosing to pause before reacting, practicing a few moments of gratitude, allowing yourself time to rest without guilt, replacing one negative thought with a balanced one. These actions may not transform your life overnight, but they slowly reshape the way you experience each day. And sometimes, the smallest change in perspective creates the biggest change in peace.
This is why Kaizen has remained relevant for decades, because it doesn't belong to one profession, one age, or one ambition. Whether you're learning, building relationships, creating something meaningful, managing your finances, or simply trying to become a better version of yourself, the principle remains the same. Small improvements, repeated consistently, lead to extraordinary results. At this point, you might wonder, can tiny actions really create extraordinary results? The answer lies in one of the most powerful ideas in mathematics, the compound effect. Imagine you improve by just 1% every single day. That doesn't sound impressive. In fact, most people would ignore it. But improvement doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows by compounding. Today builds on yesterday. Tomorrow builds on today. Week after week, month after month, those tiny gains multiply. By the end of 1 year, improving just 1% each day doesn't make you twice as good. It makes you nearly 38 times better. It's not magic, it's mathematics. The same principle applies to your habits. The first few days feel almost meaningless. The results are invisible. But every repeated action creates momentum. And momentum is powerful. Because once something becomes part of your routine, it requires less effort to continue than it did to begin. That's why consistency always outperforms motivation. Motivation is emotional. It comes and goes. Some days you'll feel unstoppable. Other days you won't feel like doing anything at all. But consistency doesn't depend on how you feel. It depends on what you repeatedly choose to do. And that's the true genius of Kaizen. It doesn't ask you to make one life-changing decision. It asks you to make one small decision, again and again, until your future becomes the natural result of your daily choices. Before we end, there's one more thing you need to know. Kaizen is simple, but there are a few mistakes that quietly prevent people from experiencing its true power. The first mistake is expecting quick results. After a few days of consistent effort, many people look for dramatic changes. When they don't see immediate progress, they assume the method isn't working. But Kaizen isn't designed to impress you overnight. It's designed to transform you over time. The second mistake is comparing your progress with someone else's. You're only seeing their current chapter, not the hundreds of small improvements that brought them there. Focus on becoming better than who you were yesterday, not better than someone else today. The third mistake is skipping the small days. People often think today's effort is too small to matter, but the smallest action is always more valuable than no action at all. Remember, Kaizen rewards consistency, not intensity. The fourth mistake is waiting for motivation. Motivation is unpredictable. Some mornings it shows up, many mornings it doesn't. If your progress depends on motivation, your progress will always be uncertain. Many people spend years saying, "I'll start again on Monday. I'll begin next month."
This time I'll do it perfectly. Kaizen doesn't ask you to restart. It simply asks you to continue from where you are. Because in the end, success doesn't belong to the fastest. It belongs to the people who refuse to stop improving. If there's one idea I hope you carry with you after watching this video, it's this. You don't have to change your entire life today.
You only have to become slightly better than you were yesterday. Because every meaningful transformation, whether it's building a career, mastering a skill, improving your relationships, or becoming the person you want to be, begins with a single decision that is repeated consistently. The beauty of Kaizen is that it removes the pressure to be perfect. Instead, it gives you permission to keep moving forward. One small improvement, one intentional choice, one step at a time. And before you realize it, the life you once dreamed about becomes the life you're living. Remember, your future isn't built by one extraordinary day. It's built by ordinary days, repeated with intention. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one small improvement you're going to make today? Share it in the comments. I read every one of them, and your commitment might inspire someone else to take their first step. If you enjoyed this video and want another practical idea that can completely change the way you think and grow, watch the next video on your screen. Until then, keep improving. One